The one topic that I certainly enjoy the most teaching in the fall is earth science. Without a doubt in my mind, you never run out of material. There's always something either in the newspaper coming up, especially living here in Western North Carolina. During that time period, we usually get some type of remnant from a hurricane. Sometimes we get a lot of rainfall. We've got slides, rock slides. There's always something to discuss and make it relevant for the kids. But now, how do you teach it in your class and make it interesting? What kind of tools are there? This little seminar is going to show you just the right fit to help you get through this. This topic would mostly cover your middle and high school classrooms. Looking at the high school curriculum, there is a couple items in here that refer to geohazards. What impacts of geohazards, protect property, landslides, and so forth. And so I found one of the best ways to teach this, again, is to make it relevant for the kids. In every county, they have what there's called an online GIS system, short for Geographic Information System. Before I even became a teacher, I used to work in the Park Service, and we did a lot of work with the GIS, especially in the early 90s, when all we had was Unix. We didn't have all this, technology out there for the general public to use. Now, there's just so many different cool applications that you can do with this. This application mostly pertains, or is going to be looking at Henderson County, where I teach. I teach at the Henderson County Early College in the western part of the state. In our county, we have a pretty robust GIS system, but then again, every county out there has got one, and the reason there is because it's used for economic development purposes. First and foremost, it's a big economic tool for developers who wanted to come into a community to either build a business or whatever. So one of the things that I do right at the very beginning of class, this is, by the way, is a 2-day lesson plan that I conduct. The first thing is I show them this picture that's in front of you right here. I set them up in groups of 4, and I'll discuss some of the main land marks that they should be aware of. Like, for instance, right here is a big shopping mall where there's a fresh market. We have an Ingles and a Harris Teeter here, and then there's a grocery store that had just moved in not too long ago. The reason I picked this particular area, it is first and foremost so prone to flooding. And what I ask the students is, in your group, and I'll tell them this area that's shaded in blue, imagine if you're a developer and you wanted to come in and you wanted to open up a brand new pharmacy for, let's say, Pharmacy X, and they were looking at this property here highlighted in blue. Do you think that this would be a really good area to open up a business? And we wouldn't talk anything about flooding at this point. Just, we just look at what's around it, and then I would point out, look, you got a big, food store here. You've got grocery stores, all these other entities, lots of houses nearby. And so I give them about 10 minutes in their groups to come up with maybe pros and cons. And most of them have driven in this area, so they, for the most part, know the area in general. And then when they come back, they report in their group, okay, what they have concluded. And almost all of them will say, oh yeah, this is a great spot. I mean, we've got, one of the main highways going through the county, or roads, that is right here. Lots of traffic, all the other commerce is there. And then they'll go into all these other details. And then I'll ask them, do you know if there's any like hazards or anything else that you may be concerned with after they've come back? And some of them will say, well, sometimes the waterways, may have a little water, but for the most part, the kids won't say too much. And before I even go into details about this specific area, I come back to this. And what I do at this point is I give them a sheet a worksheet. After the basic discussion about that area, each student in their group will get this sheet. Now, this is a culminating activity at the end of the semester, or in the middle of the semester, once I've covered some of like rock slides and earthquakes, etc., contour lines, and they'll get this sheet. The first question I ask them is this question number one, this hypothesis, and I'll ask them, what type of geohazards that you have in your neighborhood based off of your visual observation. You've lived there maybe a couple years, or maybe you've lived there for a while. What have you noticed? Is there anything in particular that you need, may be concerned with? And then I'll also point out or ask them in general, as a verbal discussion, what do y'all think? And so then they at that point, then we'll go in and the students, and then I'll go through some instructions. But the whole purpose of this little seminar is to show you some of the tools and how you can use that in your classroom. So, for instance, this is one neighborhood, and I just randomly had chosen this as an example. And this, the student will say, okay, yeah, here's my house over here. Yeah, we've got a river nearby. This whole exercise is for them to explore. Number one, is there a floodplain in your neighborhood? A lot of students live near floodplains, but don't realize that after maybe a 10-inch rainfall, the rain could actually creep up onto their land, like for instance, 100-year or 500-year flood. I mean, you're hearing big terms like that on TV all the time now. I mean, it seems like every flood now that we get, certainly this year in this area over the last few years, has been so extreme that you hear the word 500, 100-year floodplain. So with this tool, the students will go in, they'll click on the parcel search. They'll search by either address or last name, and then they'll scroll down and they'll turn this on. Now, how do they know how to do that? I've embedded the instructions inside their document here. And notice right now, Henderson County, by the way, in most counties will have this, but they've got a lot of different layers that you can interact with. So one of the big things is the students really enjoy seeing their land and their houses through aerial photography. And, they'll zoom in and so forth. And, oh yeah, there's my barn, there's my house, and so forth. And then I'll have them turn on the floodplain data. So let's assume that this house here is like student X. Well, right now, it's like, oh yeah, there's no, we do have a river, but a little stream, which you can clearly see, that they can clearly interpret on the map. And then I'll ask them, well, do you think has it ever been flooded? And some of them will say, not really, or sometimes it'll come up. And then I'll have them click on the 100 and the 500-year floodplain data. And so once they turn that on, in this particular instance, this house, the students' houses now, they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this, but we are in a 500-year floodplain. And so I'm not using this to scare the students. It's just an awareness. So for instance, if we have another, like for instance, Hurricane Ivan that came through here in 2004, oh my gosh, we got over 10 inches of rainfall. But even this past year, we got a lot of rain. And so then I'll ask the students, once they look at their houses, if you hear the word evacuation, I'll ask them, well, do you know the best route to evacuate in the event of some severe flooding? And a lot of them don't. So through this exercise, that's one of the other tools I use is, well, through this map, now go ahead and try to figure out what is the best way to evacuate from your neighborhood. So after they've looked at the floodplain, another very, very useful tool is now we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at elevation. We live in the mountains, and so we've got lots of vertical relief here. And I'll ask students, just on their worksheet, describe your land, and they'll go ahead and write, we have a hill or flat. And so here's another example where here I am showing another different location, and this is where I incorporate contour lines, and so I'll ask them to turn on the contour lines of their property. And generally on the GIS, sometimes you have to hunt for it, sometimes you don't, but looking over here on the left-hand side, it's usually underneath a natural or and then you'll see topographical. Maybe it'll be listed as a first topic. But looking further down, you'll have multiple options. And generally speaking, if you can find a good a 10-foot contour line, you're doing pretty good. And so I'll go ahead and turn this on. The reason I'm going to this particular property is this was someone's this was a student's property, and one of the things that a takeaway from the student is a lot of them don't realize that when you're looking on obviously a two-dimensional map, you're not seeing the full picture. So once they've turned it on, one of the things that you need to be aware of as an instructor is make sure that you can tell the students that there are other tools. So for instance, you can't see the lines right now, but if you look over here, more than not, they're going to have a slider bar where you can slowly bring down the topographical or the aerial photography to the point where now you can actually see it. And so, looking at it from two-dimensional here, it looks, oh, well, gosh, it looks pretty flat. But, obviously if the student lives on the property, he knows that there's hill, but does he really know how steep it is? And so as I turn this down, then I'll ask them to calculate the gradient. So there's another term that most of them get confused with. They don't understand what that is. We had just talked about the gradient, air pressure, and the atmosphere, but we never really used the word gradient per se. We just said, high, low pressure, and what's the air pressure difference. But when you use the word gradient in this context, and now we're looking at the elevation on the land, and because this is 10 foot, then or let's say it's 4 feet or whatever, I'll ask them to calculate what the gradient is from either the back side of your house or on the front side of the house where your car enters. And clearly, looking at this house, I counted up, there's about eight or nine intervals. So this house is almost 100 feet above the incoming road, just to the south of it. And then the northern part is where, of course, they come in. But so then they're able to calculate the elevation. So then what are you going to do? Well, then I have the students look at it, evaluate their property. We've talked about landslides, mudslides, and I'll ask them, is your property prone to this? And in this particular case, the student or students will go in and I'm going to turn up so as you turn this up just a little bit, now you can actually start seeing the vegetation. And now it's the time for the students to say, well, yeah, we've got some bushes over here on the backside, but perhaps, and again, I'll ask them for recommendations. How could you improve, the erosion? Do you have a lot of erosion on your property that you know of? And so after analysis, what I'm looking for is well, maybe we could start planting some more vegetation over in this section or whatever. But again, the big takeaway from this is for the kids to start thinking, again, geohazards in their backyard. And then I bring in some other relevance, that you're going to be a future land homeowner sometime. And so before you run in and buy a house, now they're going to have a lot more information and tools at their disposal. There's also some other, honestly, you could spend at least 3 days on this project. I even ask them, what are your soil types in their yard? And, there's a layer over here for that. They'll turn it on, and I'll even have them print out. There's a print option, like right up here. You can click print, and it will literally, you go through a couple steps and they can print out a map of their property and then indicate, I'll ask them to literally go out and collect soil samples from their yard and mark it on this map. And then I'll ask him, well, based off of the vegetation, do you suppose vegetation could possibly impact the pH of your soil? And I mean, this is a whole nother lab after this, which in some cases just depends on how fast we're moving through this will depend on whether we implement that one or not. But again, the possibilities is endless. Then you've got planning over here. Another kind of interesting from planning standpoint is the aerial photography. The last one they had in our county was 2019, but look at this. You can go back 2010, 1984, and literally in an area you could have inside the curriculum where they're talking about land development, human impact, you can look at a historical perspective of how human has impacted the land, which brings me up to my last point. Again, this is just some tips that I'm showing you, but right at the very beginning, I showed we had started at this particular site, and I'll have the students go back, and then I'll ask them to go ahead and turn on the floodplain data. And after turning the floodplain data on, then when the students see this, it's like, wow, I can't believe it. Look at all of the, it's fun as a teacher because then their eyes will just like pop up and, wow, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And then inevitably, almost every group will come back and say, no, we don't want to develop here. And I mentioned earlier about looking at historically what has happened in this particular region. So you could, again, this is another lesson, and like maybe the following day. So after looking at this current aerial photography, you turn this off and you go back to, let's say 1951, and then, gosh, there's nothing there. I mean, it was all just swampland. And then you could ask, why do you think the developers had developed here knowing that it was in fact a floodplain? Do you believe, had they known or had this information, that they would be willing to design and build a major shopping center around this area? One last exercise that I have the students do, and this had literally happened. This happened 2 years ago, and I asked the students the week before we had this big tropical system that came through our area to go out with your cameras. If you see anything in your neighborhoods, take a picture of it. Does it, if there's any flooding, does it correspond to what you have actually seen on the GIS, the floodplain? I mean, was it accurate? And these photographs a student had sent in to me in their project, and I have to show you this. It's quite remarkable. This particular student lives really close to this development, and he told me, and I believe it because I drive by this area, but he said that the flooding had gone up at least a quarter mile up from the main section of the shopping plaza. In addition, one of the other pictures that he had captured was a picture of a car that was literally found in the flood. In fact, in this case, it looks like a $60,000 Mercedes. And this is another great learning tool that I tell the students, as they're driving around, if they're in a big car or big pickup trucks, which a lot of my students drive, I'll ask them, do you think it's really smart to drive around barricades. And then this particular photo I borrowed from the student and showed the class, and asked them, well, what do you think? You think that was a great idea? And then the hypothesis was, well, was the car already parked there, or were they trying to get through it? And, kids come up with different theories as to, why. But again, you're bringing all of this technology into their backyard, and again, real world examples, technology, their backyard. This is just a win-win. And here's another photograph, which personally I have never seen, even after Hurricane Ivan. I had never seen the water come this far back up onto the road, right by this McDonald's and Harris Teeter, which is just on the south side of Main Street. And in fact, I'm going to go back to the original map. That photo was taken right over. Here's the McDonald's. Even after Hurricane Ivan, the water only came up maybe halfway up Spartanburg Highway. The other really interesting part of this project was there was a lot of controversy in our community of this new supermarket that did in fact open up in the floodplain about 2 years before this exercise occurred, and it was right here. And ever since, and I have the students analyze this, do you think this would impact future flooding? And sure enough, because they laid down lots of asphalt here and built it again, re-emphasized or reinforced the existing concrete there, more parking spaces, more areas for the water to run off. Now, sure enough, the water's coming way up the road, which in the past it never had done so. So again, this is a fantastic way of either introducing geohazards or a culminating activity. You can certainly adapt this for middle school, certainly for high school, but I hope this helps. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. And one thing I'm going to leave you with too, before you start to incorporate this type of exercise in the classroom, I would certainly have a couple maybe former students or some other students, when you write up your directions, to have them go through it once, just to kind of weed out some of the areas on the worksheet instructions, like over here. I've had to upgrade this at least several times over the years. So I hope this helped. If you have any question, feel free to email me. And until the next time, bye now.